Picture the last thing a knight ever sees. You're on your back in the mud. 60 pounds of Milanese steel pins you to the frozen ground. Your horse is gone, screaming somewhere behind you. Your sword is 3 feet away. Might as well be 3 miles. Above you, a man steps out of the fog. No armor, no banner, just a wool tunic, a beard full of ice, and a 6-foot pole with something ugly on the end. You raise your hand, you shout your name and title. You offer gold, lands, anything. He doesn't care. The last thing you see is the spike coming down. This is how 2,000 of Europe's most elite knights died in a single afternoon, killed by men they didn't consider human. This is the Battle of Morgarten, and it's the day 1,500 farmers killed the Middle Ages. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. November 15th, 1315. A frozen mountain pass in the Swiss Alps. The geography here isn't just terrain, it's a murder weapon. To the left, Lake Egerie, black water cold enough to stop your heart in seconds. To the right, the Morgarten slopes, steep, forested, crawling with men who have nothing left to lose. Between them, a muddy track barely wide enough for 2 horses, and marching straight into this throat, Duke Leopold of Habsburg, 25 years old, brother to the King of Germany, commander of 9,000 soldiers, including 2,000 of the heaviest cavalry in Europe. He isn't worried. He treats this as a hunting trip. Discipline some rebellious peasants, hang a few ringleaders, be home by Christmas. His column stretches for miles, a glittering ribbon of steel and silk. They are loud, they are laughing, they are completely blind to the 1,500 men holding their breath in the tree line above. The Swiss don't send a challenge, they don't wave flags, they don't follow any rules, they simply cut the ropes. It starts with a sound you feel before you hear, a deep rumble vibrating through the soles of your feet. Then the mountain begins to move. Massive tree trunks, stripped, stacked, held back by nothing but hemp and gravity, come thundering down the slope. They gather speed, snap smaller trees like matchsticks, careen toward the packed column below. The impact is catastrophic. Logs the size of battering rams smash into the center of the Habsburg line. The formation doesn't bend, it shatters. Horses rear up, terrified. They slip on the ice, throw their riders. Armored knights crash to the frozen ground and can't get up. 60 pounds of steel, no traction, turtles on their backs. The column is severed. The front can't advance, blocked by debris. The rear can't retreat, clogged by thousands still pushing forward. Then the boulders come, stones the size of wine barrels bouncing down the cliff, punching through shields, caving in helmets like parchment. The invincible heavy cavalry is now just a terrified mob trapped in a frozen bowling alley. And then the Swiss attack. They don't march. They sprint, sliding down the icy slopes on spiked boots. Perfect traction, perfect speed. While the knights below are playing Bambi on ice, 1,500 farmers hit them like a freight train. Halberds, morning stars, axes, weapons built for one purpose: crack open armor and crush what's inside. A knight struggles to his knees, raises his hand, shouts for quarter. A Swiss dairy farmer answers by driving an axe through his visor. Blood sprays across the snow. This isn't a battle, it's an execution, and it's only been 15 minutes. November 15th, 1315. The shores of Lake Egeri, deep in the Swiss Alps. If you wanted to design the perfect place to kill an army, you couldn't do better than this. The locals call it the Morgarten Pass, but that's too gentle a word. This isn't a pass, it's a throat. A narrow strip of frozen mud squeezed between two walls of death. To the left, the lake. Black water so cold it would stop your heart before you could scream. In summer, it's beautiful. In November, it's a grave waiting to be filled. To the right, the slopes of the Morgarten itself, steep, choked with timber, the kind of terrain that swallows men whole, where a horse is useless and armor becomes a death sentence. And between them, a track, barely wide enough for two horses to ride abreast. For 3 miles, this is the only path south. No side routes, no escape. Geography isn't just geography here. It's a weapon, a natural guillotine waiting for someone to walk beneath the blade. Duke Leopold of Habsburg is that someone. His column enters the pass just after dawn. And what a column it is. 9,000 men stretching back for miles. A glittering ribbon of steel and silk winding through the frozen landscape. Banners snap in the wind. Horses snort clouds of white breath. The clinking of armor and the rumble of wagon wheels echo off the slopes. They are loud. They are laughing. They are so confident that they haven't sent a single scout ahead. Duke Leopold rides near the front, surrounded by his personal guard. He isn't worried about tactics. He isn't thinking about ambushes or terrain or any of the things that should terrify a commander in a place like this. He treats this as a hunting trip. Ride in, round up some peasants, make a few examples, ride home. He has no idea that he's already inside the trap. High above, hidden in the tree line, 1,500 men watch in silence. They see the plumes on the helmets. They hear the laughter. They can almost smell the arrogance. They don't move. They don't whisper. They barely breathe. The Swiss have been waiting for this moment. And now, as the Habsburg column pushes deeper into the throat, they begin to grip their ropes. The blade is about to fall. There is no trumpet, no herald riding forward to issue a formal challenge, no flags, no ceremony, no chivalric ritual. The Swiss don't believe in any of that. They simply cut the ropes. High on the ridge, calloused hands pull knives across hemp. The fibers snap, and gravity does the rest. You hear it before you see it. A low rumble that vibrates through the soles of your feet, up through your bones. The horses feel it first, ears flattening, eyes rolling white. Then the sound grows, deepens, becomes a roar. The mountain is moving. Massive tree trunks, stripped of branches, stacked in unstable pyramids, held back by nothing but rope and patience, come thundering down the slope. They don't roll. They bounce, they cartwheel, they gather speed with every yard, snapping smaller trees like kindling, tearing through the undergrowth in an avalanche of timber and death. The first log hits the center of the Habsburg column, like a battering ram. The formation doesn't buckle, it shatters. Horses scream, they rear up, hooves clawing at the air, then come down on ice and find nothing. They slip. They fall, they throw their riders and trample them in the same motion. Armored men crash to the frozen ground and can't get up, 60 pounds of steel with no traction, flailing like overturned beetles. The column is severed in 3 places. The vanguard tries to push forward, but the path is blocked by a wall of tangled logs and writhing bodies. The rearguard tries to retreat, but thousands of confused soldiers are still marching forward, crushing their own men against the debris. There's nowhere to go, no room to maneuver, no space to even draw a sword. Then the boulders come, Stones the size of wine barrels, rolled to the edge and released. They bounce down the cliff face with sickening speed, and when they hit, they don't stop. They punch through shields like parchment, they cave in helmets, they turn men into obstacles for the next stone. The screams of men and horses blend into a single sound. Commands are shouted. Nobody hears them. Nobody can hear anything over the thunder of rock and wood and the wet crunch of impact. The invincible heavy cavalry of the Habsburg Empire is now just a terrified mob trapped in a bowling alley. And the Swiss haven't even drawn their weapons yet. Now the Swiss come. They don't march. They don't form ranks. They sprint, bursting from the tree line like wolves descending on a crippled herd. On their feet are crude wooden boards studded with iron spikes, improvised crampons. They bite into the frozen slope with every step, giving perfect traction where the knights below have none. Watch the contrast. Up above, 1,500 farmers flying down the ice with terrifying speed, sure-footed as mountain goats. Down below, the finest cavalry in Europe flailing on their backs, legs kicking uselessly, steel boots skating on frozen mud. They look like newborn fawns trying to stand for the first time, Bambi on ice. The Swiss hit them like a landslide. They're carrying weapons you've never seen in a tournament. Halberds, 6-foot poles topped with an axe blade, a hook and a spike. Morning stars, iron balls bristling with flanges, swinging on chains. These aren't designed for dueling. They're designed for one thing: breaking armor and crushing the bones inside. A knight manages to get to his knees. He raises his hand. He shouts his name, his title, his lineage. He offers ransom, gold, lands, anything. This is how war works. This is the code. Nobility surrenders to nobility. Everyone goes home rich. A Swiss dairy farmer steps forward and drives an axe through his visor. Blood sprays across the snow. There is no code here, no ransom, no mercy. These peasants have no dungeons to hold prisoners, no gold to negotiate with, and no interest in playing by rules written by the men who came to hang them. The knights, at the edge of the road, are pushed backward by the crush of bodies. They stumble, they slip, they topple into Lake Ageri. The water is black and cold enough to kill in minutes, but they don't get minutes. 60 pounds of plate armor drags them down like anchors. They claw at buckles they can't reach, straps they can't undo. They watch the surface shrink above them, a bright, wobbling window getting smaller and smaller. They don't even get to fight, they just drown. The snow is turning red, the lake is filling with steel, and the screaming hasn't stopped for a single second. This isn't a battle, it's an execution. But before we watch the rest of them die, we need to understand who these men were. Not as corpses floating in a frozen lake, but as they saw themselves. The masters of the known universe. The House of Habsburg wasn't just a noble family, it was a geopolitical inevitability. By 1315, this dynasty had wrapped its fingers around the throat of Central Europe and squeezed Austria, Styria, Carinthia, vast swathes of what is now Germany. Their lands stretched across the map like a spreading stain, and they were always hungry for more. They were the too-big-to-fail institution of the Middle Ages. Their power rested on 3 pillars: God, gold, and the heaviest cavalry in Christendom. The Church blessed their conquests, their treasury funded endless wars, and their knights, encased in the finest armor money could buy, mounted on war horses bred for size and fury, had never met an enemy they couldn't crush. At the center of our disaster stands Duke Leopold I, 25 years old, younger brother to Frederick the Fair, King of Germany. Leopold is everything a medieval prince is supposed to be: ambitious, impeccably bred, Trained in warfare since he could hold a sword, he commands respect. He radiates confidence. He has never known defeat. He is also dangerously, fatally overconfident. Historical accounts describe him as a man of action, eager to step out of his brother's shadow, hungry to prove himself. He possesses the best armor money can buy and commands a retinue of knights who have spent their entire lives preparing for exactly this kind of campaign. But Leopold suffers from a disease that has killed more empires than any plague, the inability to imagine that a weaker enemy might actually fight back. When Leopold looks at the map of the forest cantons Uri, Schweiz, Unterwalden, he doesn't see a sovereign territory. He doesn't see a people with their own laws, their own oaths, their own reasons to die before kneeling. He sees a property dispute. These peasants have imperial charters granting them certain freedoms, yes. But to Leopold, those are just pieces of paper. Administrative errors, clerical mistakes to be corrected with rope and steel. He isn't preparing for a war, he's preparing to discipline some unruly tenants. And that mistake is about to cost him everything. To Leopold, the Swiss aren't an enemy. They're not even a nuisance, they're tenants. Rebellious tenants who've forgotten their place and fallen behind on the rent. Yes, they have charters. Imperial documents granting certain freedoms, certain rights, certain protections. Leopold knows this. He simply doesn't care. Those charters are paper. He has steel. And in the arithmetic of medieval power, steel always wins. The freedom of the forest cantons, administrative errors, clerical oversights from some long-dead emperor who gave away too much. Leopold isn't invading a sovereign territory. He's correcting a mistake. When his army assembles in the town of Zug in early November, the mood is not tense. It's festive. Picture it. Knights polishing armor that's never seen real combat. Squires rushing about, brushing down horses, oiling leather straps. Servants loading wagons with supplies for what everyone assumes will be a short, glorious expedition. Pay attention to what they pack. Wine. Barrels of it for the victory feast. Fine clothes. Because a Habsburg doesn't celebrate a triumph in muddy riding gear. Extra horses for the hunting they'll do once the peasants scatter. Musicians. Someone has to play while the Duke accepts the surrender. And rope. Bundles of it. Coils stacked in the baggage train like firewood. These aren't for climbing mountains, they're not for hauling supplies, they're for hangings. Public executions in the village squares. String up the ringleaders, let the bodies swing for a few days, and the rebellion ends itself. Leopold's plan is elegant in its simplicity. March in, crush any resistance through sheer intimidation, hang the troublemakers, be back in a warm castle by Christmas. He's already thinking about the feasts, the toasts, the stories he'll tell. What he isn't thinking about is reconnaissance. He brings no mountain guides, no local scouts, no one who knows the terrain, the paths, the places where an army could be ambushed. He establishes no scouting network ahead of the column. Why would he? You don't scout for cattle, you herd them. This arrogance isn't Leopold's personal failing, it's institutional. It trickles down from the Duke to the lowest squire. Every man in that column believes with absolute certainty that peasants cannot defeat knights. They're about to discover how wrong they are, but by then they'll be drowning. There's a loophole in the code of chivalry that no one talks about. The rules, the honor, the mercy, the elaborate rituals of challenge and surrender only apply to your peers, knight to knight, noble to noble. When you fight someone of your own rank, you show respect. You take prisoners, you negotiate ransoms. War is violent, yes, but it's also civilized. A gentleman's game with gentleman's rules. When you fight peasants, you show the whip. This is how Leopold's army sees the Swiss. Not as soldiers, not as defenders of their homeland, as subhuman rabble armed with farming tools. Cattle who've forgotten their place in the natural order. You don't negotiate with cattle. You don't respect cattle. You slaughter them and move on. But not everyone is blind. There's a story, perhaps legend, perhaps truth, about a court fool in the service of a local count. When asked what he thought of Leopold's invasion plan, the fool gave an answer that silenced the room. You have all deliberated on how to get into the country, but none of you have thought about how to get out. Leopold laughed. The court laughed with him. What else could a fool know about warfare? Then there's the matter of the arrow. According to Swiss chronicles, a local noble named Henry of Hunenberg, sympathetic to the Confederate cause, tried to warn the Austrians. He shot an arrow into the Swiss camp bearing a note with a single message: "Watch out at Morgarten." Some say the warning was meant for the Swiss to help them prepare. Others say Henry tried to warn Leopold directly, pointing out that the pass was a death trap. Either way, it didn't matter. Leopold ignored it. Caution was for cowards. He had 9,000 men. He had the heaviest cavalry in Europe. He had God and gold and the divine right of the nobility to crush anyone beneath them. On November 14th, the Golden Column rides out of Zug, armor gleaming, banners snapping, musicians playing. Leopold at the head, surrounded by the flower of Austrian nobility, convinced he's riding toward a trophy ceremony. He has no idea that he's actually leading the funeral procession of the feudal age. By this time tomorrow, the feast will be for crows. Now we need to talk about why the Swiss fought like men with nothing to lose, because they were. The roots of Morgarten stretch back decades to a bitter feud called the Marschenstreit, the March Quarrel. At its heart was a simple problem: land. In the Alps, flat ground is gold. The peasants of Schwyz and the monks of Einsiedeln Abbey had been fighting over the same forests and pastures for generations. The monks had deeds. The peasants had axes. Neither side was willing to back down. Then came January 6th, 1314, the Feast of the Epiphany, a holy night. A group of men from Schwyz decided they'd had enough of the abbot's threats and Habsburg interference. They didn't send a petition, they didn't file a complaint. They stormed the monastery. What happened next was not subtle. They broke down the doors, they looted the cellars, they drank the sacramental wine until they were roaring drunk. They smashed relics, they desecrated altars, and then, just to make sure everyone understood the message, they dragged the monks out into the snow and took them hostage. In the 14th century, this wasn't just a crime, it was an abomination. Attacking a monastery was equivalent to attacking God himself. The retaliation was swift and spiritual. The Bishop of Constance, at the urging of the Habsburgs, placed the entire canton of Schwyz under interdict. You need to understand what that means. No masses could be sung, no babies baptized, no marriages blessed, and worst of all, the dead could not be buried in consecrated ground. To a deeply religious medieval society, the people of Schwyz were now spiritually dead, damned to wander hell for eternity. When the other forest cantons, Uri and Unterwalden, refused to abandon their neighbours, the excommunication was extended to all three. They were now outlaws in both the physical and spiritual realms. This context is vital. When Leopold marched south a year later, he wasn't just collecting taxes or enforcing property claims. He was coming to execute heretics who had dared to touch the church. The Swiss weren't facing defeat, they were facing damnation followed by public hanging. Surrender was impossible. Negotiation was fantasy. The only options were victory or annihilation. That's why they fought the way they did. That's why they showed no mercy. Let's zoom in. Forget the wide shot of the massacre. Focus on one man. We'll call him Count Wilhelm. The name is invented. The death is not. Wilhelm is a tournament veteran, 40 years old, encased in Milanese steel worth more than most villages. He's survived melees, jousts, border skirmishes. He knows how to fight. He knows how to win. Right now, he's screaming at his squire, trying to turn his panicked horse around in the chaos. Ice and mud everywhere, bodies underfoot. The world has become a nightmare of noise and blood. Then a man steps out of the fog. No armor, no horse, just a rough wool tunic and a 6-foot wooden pole with something ugly mounted on the end. Iron, asymmetrical, cruel-looking. Wilhelm almost laughs. He has the reach. He has the height. He has 60 pounds of protection between him and this peasant with a farming tool. The peasant doesn't aim for Wilhelm. He swings low at the horse's legs. The blade shears through tendon and bone. The animal screams and collapses sideways. Wilhelm is thrown from the saddle, crashing into the frozen mud. 60 pounds of steel pins him down. He tries to rise, but his boots find no purchase on the ice. He's flailing, helpless. Now the halberd shows its genius, its 3 weapons in one. The hook catches the rim of Wilhelm's shield and yanks. The leverage is immense. A slight pull translates into hundreds of pounds of force. Wilhelm slams back into the filth face down. The axe blade comes next. It doesn't need to cut through the helmet. The impact alone scrambles his brain, leaves him paralyzed, twitching in the slush. Finally, the spike. The peasant flips the weapon, finds the gap under the arm through the visor slit, and drives it home with his full body weight. Count Wilhelm, Lord of the Realm, veteran of a dozen campaigns, is dead, killed by a dairy farmer wielding a glorified tree pruner. This scene played out hundreds of times in under an hour. The halberd was the perfect answer to the knight. It gave a poor man the reach to engage a horseman, the leverage to drag him down, and the point to finish him off. It turned the knight's greatest asset, his armor, into his coffin. Here's something you need to understand about medieval warfare. It had rules, not official rules, gentlemen's agreements, understandings between men of noble birth about how killing should be conducted. If you were a knight and you found yourself on the losing side, you didn't panic, you dropped your sword, you raised your visor, you shouted your name and lineage, you offered a ransom, gold, land, horses, whatever it took. The victor would accept. He'd take you prisoner, treat you reasonably well, and eventually your family would pay a fortune to get you back. War was bloody, yes, but for the nobility, it had a safety net, an insurance policy written in tradition and mutual self-interest. At Morgarten, the Swiss cut that net to ribbons. When the Habsburg knights raised their hands to yield, they expected the ritual to save them. They screamed their titles. They offered ransoms that would make a peasant rich for 10 generations. They held up jeweled daggers, golden rings, anything of value. The Swiss stared at them with blank incomprehension. They had no dungeons to hold prisoners, no food to spare, no interest in gold they couldn't spend while excommunicated, and no patience for men who had marched into their homeland with ropes for hanging. They didn't see noble captives worth a fortune. They saw men who had come to burn their homes and murder their families. The halberds rose and fell, knights on their knees, hands raised, still shouting promises of wealth, silenced mid-sentence. There was no sorting of the living from the dead, no chivalric pause, just the wet thud of iron on meat, repeated until nothing moved. Those who escaped the blades found the lake. Pushed to the edge by the crush of bodies, they tumbled into the black water. 60 pounds of armor dragged them down instantly. They clawed at buckles with frozen fingers. They thrashed. They screamed bubbles. Then the bubbles stopped. Silence. To the courts of Europe, this wasn't war. It was a crime against the natural order. It was as if the sheep had not only killed the wolves, but had done so without showing the slightest respect for the food chain. The Swiss didn't care what Europe thought. They were already damned. What was one more sin? Duke Leopold did not die at Morgarten. But the man who rode out of Zug that morning, the arrogant Golden Prince, brother to the king, heir to an empire, that man was gone forever. His personal guard managed to force a path through the chaos, shoving their own men aside to clear an escape route. The chronicles describe Leopold fleeing the battlefield with his face drained of colour, weeping with rage and terror. He rode hard over the mountain paths, abandoning his army to the butchers on the ridge. By early afternoon, the screaming stopped. The silence that settled over the pass was heavier than the fog. Final count: nearly 2,000 Habsburg soldiers dead. Counts, barons, knights, the core of Austrian nobility erased in under an hour. The Swiss casualties? The chronicles vary, but most agree on a number that sounds like a typo. 12. Not 1,200. 12. The road was a ruin of smashed wagons, dead horses, and broken bodies. The snow had been trampled into crimson slush. The lake, usually crystal clear, was stained pink for yards along the shore. The survivors who limped back to Zug brought more than wounds. They brought a contagion of fear. They told stories of forest devils who couldn't be killed, who struck from nowhere, who respected neither rank nor God. News of the massacre spread across Europe with the speed of plague. In the courts of Paris, London, and Rome, kings and cardinals read the reports in disbelief. The equation that had governed warfare for centuries, heavy cavalry beats infantry, nobility beats peasantry, was wrong. But here's the strange part. The monarchs of Europe didn't just fear these mountain men, they wanted to buy them. This is the birth of the Swiss mercenary. Before banks, before chocolate, before luxury watches, Switzerland's greatest export was violence. The skills that butchered the Habsburgs, discipline, terrain mastery, absolute ruthlessness, turned out to be worth a fortune. Within a generation, every duke and king with a border dispute wanted Swiss soldiers in their vanguard. No money, no Swiss became a proverb across the continent. Even the Pope took notice. The pontifical Swiss Guard that protects the Vatican today, those men in colourful uniforms carrying halberds, are the direct, living lineage of the farmers who stood in the snow at Morgarten. We see echoes of this battle everywhere. In the frozen forests of Finland, 1939. In the jungles of Vietnam, in the mountains of Afghanistan, the lesson repeats. When the little guy refuses to play by the big guy's rules, the outcome is never certain. The knights rode into that pass believing their lineage and expensive armor entitled them to victory. They died discovering that war cares nothing for titles. It only respects leverage, physics, and the will to kill. So, the next time you look at the peaceful, postcard-perfect mountains of Switzerland, remember what lies beneath the snow. That peace was bought at a terrible price. It was paid for in the freezing mud of 1315, with the blood of princes and the swing of a halberd. If you want the stories the history books buried, the ones where empires fall and underdogs rewrite the rules, subscribe to Untold Crusades. We dig up the battles they don't teach in school.